Okay, good. Do you want to kick off?
Hi everybody, so welcome to the Museum of Royal Worcester. I have got my mask off at the moment, but I'll put it back on when Fuchsia starts talking. Today we're chatting with Fuchsia Hart, who's a guest curator for our new display, Worcester Porcelain and the Arts of Islam. And it's open until February 2021, so please do come down if you can. It's been made possible with support and funding from National Lottery Heritage Fund, Arts Council England, the Subject Specialist Network for Islamic Art and Material Culture, Birmingham Museum Trust and the West Midlands Museum Development with their Expert Eye project. If you are able to visit us, we open safely in July this year, and we're open Thursday to Saturday 10 till 5 p.m. and on Sundays 10 till 4. It's a very safe space at the moment, so do please come down if you can. You can buy your timed ticketed entry ticket from our website at museumofroyalworcester.org/your-visit. That's museumofroyalworcester.org/your-visit. And we're just so pleased to have you here today, Fuchsia. It's going to be a bit of a chat. We've got a little bit of a favourite object from Fuchsia, and then lots of time for questions from you. So hopefully, if Fuchsia's online now, she can also see any questions coming in from you guys. We started working with you in January, didn't we, to find out some hidden gems in our collection. We wanted to find out about the pieces that we had in our collection that we didn't know much about from West and South Asia, and we had absolutely no expectations of what we would find, what we might be able to do together, but I think hopefully you'll agree from the end of this session today, this little chat, that we've achieved quite a lot together. If you are joining us on Facebook, welcome. If you're not, and this is coming after the fact, then there should be available on Facebook, for you to see, and you'll be able to catch up any time. It's probably time for me to let you introduce yourself. Carry on.
Okay, I will unmask now. Well, hello. I want to say my hellos and thank yous to everyone who's tuning in, both those of you who are live now and anybody joining us afterwards on Facebook. I'm actually really glad that we were able to do something online, because obviously this is not the best time to be putting something into a physical museum. But I'm glad to be doing this event, and I hope that we'll also put some more of it online. I'll probably write a blog. There's actually one, I'll mention this when I talk about the piece, but I've already got some stuff online. But for those of you who are local, I hope this will give you a bit of extra information and whet your appetite if you come down at a later date. I also want to extend my thanks to the Islamic Art and Culture Subject Specialist Network, hosted at Birmingham Museums, and to the Expert Eye programme, which is funded by the West Midlands Museum Development. Because especially now, when so many museums and major national museums are facing real hardship, local museums are of course hit as well, and even harder in many ways. And I've actually really enjoyed being able to do this for a much more local museum, which really does need our support at the moment. And actually what I hope I'm going to be able to show you is that we can still tell really big international stories of both art, culture, and even economies, and speak to much wider communities than those just, in the borders of Worcester. So, enough of all this introductory stuff. I actually should start talking about the display. But also that links on to, I should introduce myself a bit. I'm currently a PhD researcher at the University of Oxford. I'm in the Oriental Institute working specifically on Islamic art and architecture. That's my background is in both the study of Iran, Persian studies, and in the study of Islamic arts, material culture and architecture. And my PhD focuses on the first 3 decades of the 19th century, during the reign of the second king of what is known as the Qajar dynasty of Iran. And he nicely links with our first piece, which I want to show you today. Now he's actually up on the first shelf, which you can just probably see over my shoulder. But we've got a couple of pieces out so I can actually, show you some things up close today. So I have to admit, yes, I'm starting with my own favourite and a subject I'm very biased towards, which is Fat Ali Shah himself.
Can I interrupt here?
Yeah.
When Fuchsia found this in the store, she almost dropped it on the floor.
Yeah, I had no idea when I first came to do the research here on these objects at Worcester, exactly what I would find. So it seemed too good to be true that I found an object which is pretty much directly related to my PhD. So I'm just going to get up and come and show this to all of you. So this is Fath Ali Shah. I don't know quite where our focus is. So this is Fath Ali Shah. He reigned Iran from 1797 to 1834. I'll just show you the back for those of you who, like me, love to see the museum number and all the old labels. So yes, he was king of Iran from 1797 to 1834. And he was a ruler who was very aware of his own image. And he was very aware of the impact and sort of, almost the branding that his own image could provide for his dynasty. So in that vein, he commissioned a number of images of himself during his reign. These were mainly large kind of traditional oil portraits on canvas, full-size portraits of himself. But this also extended to putting himself on porcelain. And he commissioned a number of services from British porcelain producers during his reign. From Wedgwood, he commissioned 2 services, and also a service from Royal Crown Derby. But from Worcester, he commissioned a number of tea sets and a number of medallions, like the one I just showed you. Now, the one here, you'll notice, was just very plain. It was very simple. It was white, with what's probably a transfer printed image on it. And then what would have happened, and this is why, if you can, you have to come and see the display, these were painted up afterwards by hand and actually quite lavishly coloured and gilded, and they would have been set into very, very lavish metal jewelled mounts. We've seen a couple of them in private hands go through the auction houses, very, very lavish portrait medallions of the Shah. And then there were the teacups as well, and these were all made to be presented as courtly gifts. And actually, we had a good discovery, because we were very happy that one of the curator of Islamic objects at the Hermitage in St. Petersburg got in touch with us to say that there was a set of these coffee cups actually in the Hermitage, which had been given by the Qajar court, by Fath Ali Shah's court, to the imperial court in Russia at the time. So this tells us both something about Worcester during this period, the early 19th century, and something about Iran during this period. So it shows us that Royal Worcester porcelain was an incredibly sought after prestige product. It was desired not only by the elite in England, but it was desired by the elite much further afield, and even as far afield as Iran. And it was disseminated actually around quite a few countries. And I've seen a couple of these pieces also in the collection of the Royal Palace in Tehran as well, so we know that some of them are there. But what the court actually did was while the porcelain was made in Worcester, there were sort of metal holders for the cups and metal trays also made to accompany the sets. So it's kind of a wonderful meeting of English porcelain and Iranian metalwork, which we see in these objects. A sort of wider point that I want to bring out with these objects, because obviously our display is called Worcester Porcelain and the Arts of Islam. So I kind of want to try to tease out some of the sort of Islamic or perhaps not so Islamic facets of this. And one thing, I think there are probably there's quite a mixture of you in the audience, but for those of you who might not be familiar with Islamic art, I think one of the biggest myths about Islamic art is that neither people nor animals are depicted. And we've just seen an object, a set of teacups as well that we have on display, which do depict a person and somebody who was, very much a Muslim. And so in that vein, I sort of wanted to make clear the point that, well, this is just a myth, really, that neither humans or animals were depicted. Yes, within a specifically religious context, for example, within a mosque, it's very, very rare to see depictions of people or animals. But in the wider kind of secular, let's say, or perhaps more the real sort of like courtly, palatial context, it's actually quite common all across the spread of since the beginning of Islam, let's say in the 7th century, to see objects which do depict living beings. So this is quite a nice example which speaks to that. But this object can also, and actually I think a lot of objects in the case, we can sort of ask ourselves, what do these actually have to do with Islam? And to be honest, part of the answer is, well, you know, specifically not very much. None of these objects are specifically, let's say, religious in themselves, but they are all in some way connected to part of the world or a culture or a people which are, you know, and have been majority Muslim, although, you know, they are as well very diverse areas. But what I wanted to say then in connection with that is that actually this shows us of the diversity that there is and has always been within these communities. Not everything that these communities consume or produce have to be directly related to Islam, and actually it's wonderful to be able to see these teacups which Fat Ali Shah commissioned, which are very much from within the European and English porcelain tradition, which sort of gives us an idea of the diversity of the material culture of the court, and actually speaks to a kind of global, this is something I'll touch on again more, but a very much a global 19th century eclecticism. And actually we know that the courts in Iran in the early 19th century was very eclectic, as much of early 19th century design was. But I should stop rambling on about... I should stop rambling on about Fat Ali Shah as much as I could carry on talking about him. I would be happy to carry on talking about him, and if anyone has any more questions about him, I'm happy to ask them.
And please do put your questions in the chat because we'll try and get to them. We might not get to all of them, but Fuchsia has promised that we can send her an email and she will reply to every single one.
I'm more than happy to answer any questions which are in the comments or which might come up afterwards. So the next object which we've got out is also an object which is in the display, but that the museum has a number of versions of this object, so we wanted to get one out for you. So I'll just show it to you before I start talking and waving my hands around. Yeah, I mean I'll just show it to the camera so that you can all have a look at it, and the inscription there, which actually I suppose it's going to be back to front on this camera,
yes,
but
it will.
yeah, you can all get an idea there. So, for safely put it back down on the table. So this is a plate. If the objects of Fat Ali Shah were made at the beginning of the 19th, well, they were actually probably made around 1820, and this is actually a plate of a similar date, but this wasn't made for a client in Iran. This was made for a client in India, and it was made, yes, around 1820 for the Nawab, which is a sort of a local ruler, the Nawab of the Carnatic, an area in India, and he was called Azam Jah, and the inscription in the centre of the plate here gives his name and his titles, as well as the date, 1236. Now that, not to throw you, that's the Islamic date, going by the Islamic calendar, which starts in the 620s. So this is equivalent to 1820 in our calendar, in the Gregorian calendar. And these, again, speak to a bigger history of global consumption of these objects, because fascinatingly, the set, it was actually a very, very large order from the Nawab of the Carnatic. It was some 1,000 pieces. And this is actually, I should say, an object from the breakfast service. The dinner service actually has a sort of a very rich dark blue on the rim. So the pink is from the breakfast service. And yes, the order was placed in Madras in 1820 with a local export-import firm there in Madras, and they then passed the order on to Worcester. And even though the order was placed in 1820, the order was not shipped until 1823 because it was such a large order. And yes, the main design, which actually we don't get on the breakfast plate, but on the dinner services, each of the plates of the dinner service has a different flower in the centre. And these were all taken from a publication called Curtis's Botanical Magazine, which was sort of all the rage at the time in England.
Which we also have in the archive.
Yeah, exactly, and I'll get on to talking about the design archive next. But I think the thing that was the real inspiration for these, and this is now starting to think about the political as well as the economic situation in the region at the time, which was the Carnatic, the region for this, the ruler of which these were produced for, had actually been annexed by the East India Company only a few years before. And it was under de facto control of the East India Company. Following the Carnatic Wars, the East India Company had sort of bailed out the ruler of the Carnatic. So he was basically ruler in name only. And the East India Company was greatly benefiting, of course, from the economic control of the region at the time. But in 1817, so 3 years before this service was commissioned, the East India Company themselves commissioned a service from Worcester, which was a whopping 7,000 items. So it's actually one of the biggest services that Worcester was ever produced in Worcester. And it's very likely that the Nawab of the Carnatic would have seen that service when he was dining with the East India Company, and this may well have influenced his decision. But I think what this really shows us is that obviously East India Company rule and of course exploitation of India had massive and myriad effects on particularly these regions of India, but there were also wider effects on fashion and taste, because the Nawab of the Carnatic, any self-respecting ruler, would have wanted to have the very sort of prestigious product of a porcelain service coming from Worcester. And actually something which I wanted to mention here, which I think is something that certainly I didn't know before I started doing the work here with the museum, is that Royal Worcester never quite existed as a sort of one entity, as a singular factory. It's actually there have been a number of factories working on this site since porcelain was first made here in 1751. I know there's going to be I know there's going to be a mixture of audience here of people who know a lot about Worcester and of people who know more about the Islamic side or vice versa. So there have been a number of factories working here, and some of them overlapping, but some of them more successful than others at certain times.
And not all in the same location, but all using the river and canals and
and this the service. Oh yeah, you can have a look at the. Louise is going to show you.
That's right. This one's from Chamberlain factory.
The back stamp, because this one was made by the Chamberlain factory. Whereas even though it's at a similar time,
it's back to front, isn't it?
Whereas the teacups and the portrait medallions made for Fat Ali Shah were made by Flight Bar and Bar, another of the very successful early factories here. So this is one half of the history that we want to tell here, which is that elites and rulers from across what we sort of have, has been known as the Middle East, but we sort of think of it more as West Asia, and stretching to South Asia through Iran to India. The elites of these countries have commissioned pieces and services from Worcester since the 19th century, early 19th century. But the other half of the story, because what we're trying to do with the displays is very much tell a story of two-way exchange, because the other way in which these workshops and these factories have met and responded to and engaged with this part of the world and this artistic tradition is through adopting motifs and shapes which they have taken from objects from this part of the world. And something which I was really sort of surprised and pleased to see when I came to do the research here was that I thought I was just going to be looking at ceramic objects. But in fact, I spent quite a lot of the time in the design archive because wonderfully, fantastically, still here at the museum, there is a considerable number of publications from the original design archive, which are the books from which all of the designers and artists drew their inspiration. So, and I had no idea that, again, that this existed or what I was going to find there, but there were a couple of works in there that I was really excited to see, and some of these have gone in the display, but I've also got something here to show you, so just one example. Put that there in case we need it.
Can I turn this on and follow any of the comments and answer any questions? Is that right?
Yeah.
Right, yeah, okay.
Just so we can see what your questions are. There you go.
Well, thank you.
So there's one work in particular I want to show you, which is a publication from 1876, which we found in the design archive. But this is actually, well, the design archive copy is in the display, so I've actually happened to have my own copy, which I brought along. And this is a work called Persian Art. And it was published by what was then known as the South Kensington Museum, which is now, of course, known as the Victoria and Albert, the V&A in London. A number of what are known as art handbooks, which really it was sort of a guidebook. It was your sort of catalogue for when you were walking around the museum. And this guide was to the recently opened Persian court at the museum. And this is something, again, that I could talk about for a long time, and I can also answer some more questions about and direct you to some more reading. But it was sort of, yes, a guide to the V&A's Persian collection, and it's written by Major Murdoch Smith, who actually was a royal engineer. He was in Iran to help build the telegraph, which actually is also connected to India, in the sense that it was the overland telegraph route to connecting to India. But so he was building telegraph in Iran, and while he was there, he was actually enlisted by the V&A to collect for them, and he became quite an authority on Persian art. And he wrote this guide to accompany the court, and it also has some lovely illustrations in it. So I just wanted to show you, if I can just get that, you can get the sort of idea. And I wanted to show you this one because this is actually a shape which we do find in Worcester pieces as well. So while I say that this was used by visitors to the V&A to guide them around the collection, it serves another purpose, which was one of the main aims of the V&A, was to instruct the nation in good design. Of course, you know, the V&A was very much a product of people like William Morris, and it was this time when good design meant a lot. And so these kind of works were also used, as we really can see it firsthand here, by artists and designers. And what we were actually just talking about, something that's quite wonderful, is that this edition was released in 1876 and is in the Design Library, and from 1877 a lot of Persian shapes start popping up in Royal Worcester. So I think we can see quite clearly that there's a direct correlation between this work being received by the artists here and them producing Persian shapes from it. And actually I want to show you, I've got one of those shapes here. Yes, thank you.
We do have a few questions, but I think they can wait for you.
Perfect. So yes, this is a specific example which I'm just going to show you. We have a copy of this in the display, but this is actually the original. This must be it's a photograph.
It is, yeah.
Possibly sort of in the showroom. It's a photograph sort of for show, and I hope this is sort of working, but you can get an idea of the shape there. And actually it says down here 854 water bottle, Persian style, made in 1881. So the artists were very aware that what they were doing very much was a Persian style. And this is a shape which we see very widely throughout Worcester production in this period actually. And it's a distinctly Persian style, this sort of bulge in the long slender neck is very distinctly Persian. But what's interesting about it is it's actually more often found in metalwork and much earlier than the 18th century in Iran. But it's a well-known metalwork shape that here has sort of transmuted across into ceramics in Worcester. And actually, I don't know whether you were able to see it on the screen, but in this band across here, there's actually sort of what we'd refer as sort of to as pseudo-Arabic script. So they're even trying to mimic the script that might have been on these bottles when they were made in metal. And all of this is to say I should emphasise that this is because Persian art and Persian shapes were very much in fashion in this period. As I say, I already mentioned William Morris, but he was very aware of what was thought of as Persian art, and he collected some ceramics from Iran, and it was a time when the greatest designers in this country were very receptive to the arts of Iran. How are we doing time-wise? How long have I been going for?
It's past.
Oh, we're 1:30 already, okay. Well, I'm not going to go on for too long because I also want to, well, it's Saturday afternoon, so we don't want to keep you for too long. But yes, I think what I wanted to also add is that it wasn't only Iran and Persian art which provided inspiration, but other parts of what we would think of as the Islamic world as well. And I think you can actually just see it, I hope you can just see it over my shoulder down here. We have one shelf which discusses imitation of Iznik ware more. And Iznik, of course, is it's in today's Turkey, just to the southeast of Istanbul, and in the 16th and 17th century it was a site of huge production of ceramics in what was then the Ottoman Empire, of course. But actually what's sort of interesting to note here, and this is something that we see on the piece from the archive here, which is a plate which shows Iznik designs from Racinet's L'Ornement Polychrome, which is another late 19th century publication, which is here in the design archive, is that these Iznik designs are actually labelled as Persian. And this shows that the appreciation for Persian art at this time sort of led to the thought that anything that is good taste and anything that is sort of sufficiently decorative and in keeping with what people wanted was often thought to be Persian. Although I should also add that, of course, that in the 1870s, a big cache of Iznik pottery was found in Rhodes, on the Greek island of Rhodes, and this led specialists to think that Iznik was actually from Rhodes, and it was often called Rhodian. So if it wasn't being called Persian, it was being called Rhodian. So there wasn't necessarily this understanding that this inspiration was coming directly from Turkey, but still it was very much fashionable at the time. So I'll just end by bringing us up to modernity. I personally, working on the 19th century, I have really enjoyed centering the discussion in the display around the 19th century, and this is when we see this wonderful two-way exchange of Worcester picking up the motifs and shapes and equally the ordering of pieces by the elites from what we think of as the Islamic world. But we do bring it up to pretty much the modern period. And because what I found interesting about this is the way in which this production demonstrates the changes in the relationship between England and the Middle East, and particularly moving towards the Gulf, and reflecting the changes in the economic fortunes of the region. Because starting in around the 1960s, there are a lot of orders from the Gulf countries as they are benefiting from the discovery of oil. They are becoming, yes, very oil wealthy states. And again, they want to participate in the consumption, the commissioning and the use of these prestige products. And they are ordering services from Worcester. But again, what's nice about it is that there's a bit of a, again, there is Worcester and the people, the artists who are producing these things are quite receptive to the shapes which are traditional to the region. And it is right behind me, so you're not going to be able to see it, but there's a very distinctive shape of coffee pot, the traditional sort of Arabian coffee pot, which was produced for a number of services at Worcester, and alongside very traditional sort of coffee bowls. So while these commissions are coming from a very different part of the world, Worcester's doing the same thing at responding and picking up on the shapes which are very commonly used. And I've also, to wrap up on Iran, which you might be able to see, you can just see it, the very lots of gold here. I wanted to include this one and just mention it because actually it's an example of the ways in which Worcester in some ways doesn't respond to the shapes or the motifs of the region, because they used for this very gold plate, which was actually, looks like it was a commission for the last Shah of Iran, Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi from the Pahlavi dynasty. The artists have used a pre-existing Worcester design, an acid-etched gilded design, and then they have placed the Pahlavi coat of arms in the middle. So again, it's still showing a desire for these ruling elites to be consuming porcelain, but in a very specifically traditionally sort of European way of having traditional armorial wares, which is basically what this is. It's an armorial wear in exactly the same way that the Carnatic service was an armorial to represent him back in the 19th century. So I am going to stop because I think you can see the questions.
We have got some questions.
Okay,
yeah.
So I'm sort of going to stop there. If there are any questions, keep them coming. But yeah, I just want to conclude to sort of tie everything together by saying that the real aim with this has been to show the exchange between Worcester and this part of the world that I'm sure many of you would never have realised that there was actually the extent of the exchange and how interesting this is. And I think that this picture that emerged to me very quickly of this sort of two-way exchange of pieces from Worcester going there and then motifs and styles coming from that part of the world here. And I'm really glad to see that we've been able to sort of tease out these much bigger stories of artistic production, artistic styles, fashion, taste, culture, and even, stories of political connections and the economic history. And we've only scratched the surface, but it's been wonderful to be able to really tell much bigger stories that go far beyond the borders of Worcestershire, but through this very sort of local collection. Absolutely. Yeah, so I'm going to leave it there, but we'll see what questions.
This is the time when Fuchsia feels like she's on mastermind. I was going to put your questions to her. Hi Jill, we've got Jill with us, and Jill's one of our original volunteers who helped us pull all the stuff out of the archive. Because originally I thought when we started we were just like, we're just going to get this, Arabic expert in to tell us what our plates say, and it's just turning into so much more than that. There's right then, here we go. How would the Arabic Persian script be transferred to the plate or the items? Did it have to be provided by the client, or did the Worcester potteries have such scribes who were fluent in Arabic and Persian script? Really good question.
This is a really good question, and actually, because this causes some humour occasionally, and that sometimes it's done really badly, I have. On this Carnatic plate here, I was actually thinking about this because I said that it was commissioned in Madras. So what I expect would have happened is that the representative of the Nawab would have, put together, it's a bit like a seal of the Nawab. It's very much akin to what we'd expect to see from a seal or a. Obviously being. I'll show it to you again. Yeah,
as well, so.
I think this must be transfer printed. Yeah, because it's so. The quality is really good. So that's obviously then been sent from the agent in Madras to Worcester, and it's been copied very, very faithfully because that's very legible to somebody who can read the Arabic or Arabo-Persic script. That's very legible. But there were some more.
There's a coat of arms with it all the wrong way round, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, there was something. I can't remember where that was, but there was one where the words had just got switched, because obviously Arabic runs from right to left, or it was either Arabic or Persian, but it had got, so some of them do kind of get a bit garbled along the way, but generally, production, they did manage to do quite a good job, actually. Yeah.
That brings me to one of my questions, because we were chatting, I think, when we were first looking through, when we found this book in the archive,
Persian art,
and then we looked through folders of shapes. We've got folders and folders and folders of photographs, just like this one, of the shapes through the years, and they've all got their own number, but obviously they can all be decorated in any way, shape or form that they like. Blush ivory is very popular, so you can have something that's, Persian style, but then just is covered in roses, and when you look at it with my Royal Worcester hat on, you don't actually think, oh, that's a Persian shape. I just wanted to know how accurately you felt that the Worcester factories portrayed these shapes. I mean, in 1877, a year after I've got this book, they might be quite good, but after that, it all gets a bit wrong, doesn't it? There's kind of a mixture. Sometimes the shapes are produced really faithfully, and for me, when I first came, there were some objects that I immediately went, that must be a copy of it. And then there were some things I looked at a bit longer and thought, it's close, but is it, And then there were some objects which took me quite a long time to read, so to speak. And the more I looked at them, I realised it's because it's just a total mash-up of Persian and chinoiserie. Because of course, and this is something I feel I probably should have mentioned, is that on ceramics of this ilk, produced by the great English porcelain factories, the stuff we see from Wedgwood as well as Worcester, and we're very used to seeing the chinoiserie and the japoneserie, or whatever we call it. And I think that's much more, because that sort of was much more widespread and kind of had more staying power, I think, in some ways. But we're less used to sort of thinking immediately like, oh, of course, there were Turkish patterns and Persian patterns, and but yes, so sometimes they're copied, sometimes the shapes are copied very faithfully, but as you say, it'll be a completely Persian shape, then with a chinoiserie design on it, or a very English sort of rosy design on it. Then sometimes there are things that are a total mixture, and are real kind of, again, I really see the eclecticism of the 19th century coming through, that you will have objects which are, a Persian shape with a handle which we'd expect, except the handle has become a dragon, and then it also has finials on the top of it, and it's kind of neo-Gothic as well. I like that she's saying eclectic now, earlier she was saying mongrels.
yeah. No, I mean, some of them are mongrels. I mean, that's not to say that I don't love a mongrel, but they are, and actually this is something that's important to say, and I feel like, especially coming from my side of it, of the sort of Islamic art side of it, is that we must resist the temptation to think of these pieces as good or bad, I had to kind of put aside my, reaction of like, well, it's Persianate, but it's a bad copy, because that is not the right kind of framework within which to see these objects. They are what they are, they're produced in a very different context for a very different audience, and now as that my eye has become accustomed to them, I mean, I love them, and they're stunning works of art, actually, and I wish, it's difficult. Oh, actually, hold on. Let me show you this. This is good. This is, can also do a plug for Melting Pot, the magazine that you get if you join as a friend. And this is a good example of a sort of a type that was produced in the sort of 1880s of a shape that is coming from the Persian shape, but has gone its own way and has become quite sort of neo-Gothic as well. And at the beginning I thought this was hideous, but now I absolutely love it.
She's sold.
Yeah.
Well, I've got a few more questions if that's okay.
Yeah.
We've probably got another 15 minutes, so maybe a couple more questions, and then we've got a couple of questions from Councillor Jabba Riaz has joined us. Thanks, Jabba. And he just wanted to know whether there were any Sufi influence in later pieces commissioned. I think we're getting into sort of research we've not managed to crack yet.
Sufi. Okay. I'm actually going to have to say no. I think. I mean, there are shapes. There are ceramic shapes which are specifically connected to Sufis within particularly the context of Iran. The one that really pops out into my head is the Sufi begging bowl. So for those of you who might not know this, Sufis are the sort of mystical branch of Islam, and just as we might think of our sort of monks, let's say, as having very sort of like ascetic, pared back lives, this is a life that a lot of Sufis followed or espoused. And the begging bowl was a sign of the mendicant Sufi, you know, the sort of the wandering dervish, is the stereotype, I think, here quite often. And the begging bowl was very much the symbol of this. And the real begging bowls were, they were actually, we have some that are carved from sort of cocoa nuts. But yes, this was a shape that then did travel into ceramics. Definitely sort of from the 17th century in Iran, but I've never seen one, I haven't knowingly seen one produced by the English porcelain factories. I'll keep an eye out if I ever see one. But I'll think about this. If anything else pops to mind, I'll get back to you.
We'll make sure she gets the questions, don't worry. And then, any techniques in design work copied or learned by the craftsmen at Worcester taken from the Indian subcontinent? So we sort of touched on that a little bit.
Yeah, okay. Something I haven't talked about here, and something we haven't included in the display, but this just reminded me of this, is that Worcester, and actually I don't know quite as much about these because it wasn't sort of, I don't think it was the most directly interesting part, but it's something that's probably good to discuss, is that there were a series of models of sort of figures, sculptures, do you remember? Yeah. Of Indian figures and Indian craftsmen, actually. And in the design archive, we found
photographs.
Oh, do you know, it's Kipling. I think it was connected to I think it was Kipling's son that published it, this sort of book on Indian crafts.
Oh, yes.
And this had ended up in the design archive here, but we did find some photographs as well of sort of like weavers, wool spinners, people making carpets, people making shoes and pots and all this sort of thing. And there was a series produced from that. I mean, frankly, I mean, and this is something that does need to be addressed. I mean, I think these are now things that, frankly, we might also find a bit offensive. Yes. They're sort of, they're highly stereotypical, and, you know, it's sort of got a very much kind of Orientalist sort of ethnographic, looking at the other in their sort of as craftsmen, and it's not a totally flattering image, I don't think. But equally, it's, and there are a number of depictions of people across Worcester production as well, which is something that we have talked about a bit, and something that we might work on some more, actually, about the way to display these things, actually, and the right ways to, because these things shouldn't be ignored, I don't think. But anyway, sorry, I'm going a bit just thinking about India. But I wouldn't say, for example, I didn't really see any I didn't see any examples of like Mughal Indian ceramic traditions being replicated here at Worcester. But I think that's not a surprise to me, and there is a reason for that, which is that Mughal ceramics, well, first of all, there wasn't the same level of ceramic production in India as there was in Iran at the time, especially when it was collectible here. So yeah, there's nowhere near the same volume of Mughal ceramics in this country in the late 19th century, you know, circulating around the big private collections, or let's say the V&A at that time. So I think Worcester and the artisans here at that time period are very much responding to what they're seeing, and the Indian tradition is just not what they're seeing. You know, I mean, obviously carpets, this is happening in other realms, like Indian carpet tradition, yes, definitely. That comes in to English carpet design, but well, of course, so does Persian carpet design. But in the ceramics, I'd say not so much.
And it's not something we were specifically looking for either when we were.
No, I mean, there are other pieces made for other Indian clients, and there's one of them up here actually, which was for the Nawab of Bahawalpur, and that's in the 1930s. So, but again, that's a very kind of like standard, what we think of as sort of like an English armorial service. So it's not really picking up on Indian design traditions necessarily.
Yeah. And I think that's the one that has in the design library.
The wrong way round. I think you're right. The Persian on the crest of the Nawabs of Bahawalpur, that was the one that was the wrong way round.
Lots still to write about what we found.
Yeah.
10 more minutes. Let's see if we can get any more questions answered. Oh, that's a really interesting one. The Chinese potteries were available at the time, so why were they coming to Worcester? I suppose at that point Worcester's got such a big sort of pedigree already there.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that's interesting because the East India Company, much earlier on, the East India Company was commissioning its services from China. And then, as I said, it then in 1817 commissions a service from Worcester. I mean, this is not exactly my area of expertise. I know people who know much more about this than I do, but from what I've read, it's just not a surprise. If you can commission from England, then you're going to, really. I mean, of course, yes. So I'd say the general pattern is that before England had its own porcelain industry, yes, they very much were commissioning from China, but that's not to say that people, you know, didn't commission from both. Fat Ali Shah did also commission pieces from China. I know that. So I think it depends on a case-by-case basis in a way. But yeah, during the late 18th and early 19th century, this was the place to come. You know, it was
You had the royal warrants.
Exactly. It was where, you know, you wanted to commission your pieces from the same place that Nelson hadn't. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Just before Fat Ali. No, is that right? I can't remember. But you know, they've got the royal warrant. They've just created the Regency service, and so it's very much, you know, the fashion of the time. I think everybody wants to have their kind of their Worcester, their bit of Worcester, and I think that's interesting seeing Fat Ali Shah commissioning from Wedgwood, Royal Crown Derby, and Worcester, and all this stuff going to Iran. It really speaks to the kind of like the global trends and fashions of the time. So yes, that China's still going, but Worcester was incredibly. I mean, we describe it as a prestige product. You know, it was everybody wanted to have the latest thing, I suppose.
We would love to know where it all is now.
Yeah,
what
I know.
Still survives
From the stuff from Iran. Yeah, I know. I mean, I've seen lots of bits of it come up at auction. That's the thing. I mean, there's definitely some of it still in Iran. And then, with the Wedgwood service, there's bits of it in the V&A. We've now found the ones in the Hermitage and Hermitage, I should probably say. And there are the bits here, but we're going to keep trying to.
The more stuff we've got online, the more.
Yeah. If anyone sees any, let us know.
Well, show us what you've got at home as well.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I'm always looking on eBay now. I've got all my eBay settings, just alerts, just in case one of them comes up on eBay.
Right.
Any more?
I think we've gone. Oh no, we've got loads of questions. Right.
Really?
So we might have to do. Gemma's asked us what the rarest piece that Worcester commissioned is, and is there? What's the rarest piece that we've?
I mean, that's what from
what
this
rare?
lot.
Gemma, you'll have to tell us whether you mean rare now because it still survives.
Yeah, that's hard to. Again, I mean, well, that's what we're just saying. It's really hard to know what still survives out there, really, because you never know what people are going to have squirreled away in their attic, or I mean, I'm hoping that more of these pieces will turn up, but.
Oh, that's a nice question. Yeah. So, what are available currently on our website to view? We have been putting things up on Twitter. As part of this funding, we photographed quite a lot of the collection, so we're hoping to create some web pages so that we can actually show some more of these wonderful images. Obviously, if you're not able to come to us to see the display. And Fuchsia's going to be doing a few more bits for us, haven't you?
Yeah, I'd like to get more of these. Now we've got the photography.
Absolutely.
It would be great to write some more of the catalogue entries, because I think it would be useful for both. It's useful for both sides of the story, for both people who are interested in Royal Worcester to see the kind of stuff that's. I do have some more questions here.
Yeah.
For people from the Royal Worcester side to see that this stuff was being made, and also that it's interesting for people from my side of it to see the kind of reception of these Islamic pieces in this country. Sam, I've just seen your question. So I'm being asked, do any of the items indicate distinctly Sunni or Shiite inclinations? How does the item's purpose make a difference in how we think about the writing on a particular item? Yeah, this is really interesting. For those of you who aren't sort of, coming at it from the Islamic side of it, so the Sunnis and the Shi'is are the two major groups within Islam. And I wouldn't say that, because none of this stuff is really, as I said, none of this stuff is really produced for a religious audience. So, in that way, we're thinking much more towards the kind of courtly performance of royalty rather than sort of like aiming for a performance of religion in any way. I'm just trying to think whether there's anything that. No, I'd say it's all, when we do have script and when we have messages, it's much more along the lines of the courtly, the motto or the insignia, whatever sort of is the motto of the region at the time. How does the item's purpose make a difference in how we think about the writing on a particular item? That is an interesting question. I'd say that most of the inscriptions that I read, because that's initially what I came to do as part of the Islamic Subject Specialist Network, was to read the calligraphy, the inscriptions. I found that most of them were these mottos, really. And that is something that I found interesting, because it is these rulers and these courts very much participating again in this tradition of armorial wear. This was the way to demonstrate that your court was both rich and successful but also on trend, basically, I think is what we're looking at here. So these are functioning in different ways, I'd say, to the ways that, within the wide spectrum of Islamic arts, and it's more sort of what the canonical Islamic objects that we think of. Yeah, we see numerous different ways in which inscriptions are used, whether that's sort of evoking the religious environment with the Quran or mention of Allah, or even in sort of talismanic ways. We see inscriptions as sort of protective emblems, and but then again, a lot of the time they are just used to show who the patron of something is or the owner of something is. So I think here it's very much that sort of that courtly performance of the ruler's name, very much in that tradition. Yeah. Shall I look through?
I think we're about a minute away, so I think we might have to call it a day. And we can always send anything.
Oh, someone said, oh, well, it's Sophie, can we get a close-up of the acid-etched gilding?
Oh, yeah.
Go on. You can actually have a look at the display because we're on the phone, so you can have a look. This is actually wonderful. I'm glad. That's a good idea.
It's back to front again because we haven't done this very well. What? Hang on. Sorry. Left. Where are we? What? How not to do it at home, folks. There it is. Right.
Yeah.
Can you see that? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Imagine it's the other way around.
No, it's brilliant.
Yeah.
It's incredibly lavish. Good. Shall we Shall we sign off? Let you all go back to your relaxing Saturday afternoon.
If you're not already, museum plug, please follow us on Twitter at the MORW or on Instagram at the _MORW. And yeah, we're hoping to have loads more stuff online. And if you can visit, do visit if you can. Like many sectors, the arts is really struggling at the moment. And my wonderful colleague Fiona, shout out to Fiona, printed this off me, but it's going to be back to front. I'm in the comments. I am going to post a link to our Virgin Money Giving page, and we'd appreciate if you could donate to help us through these challenging times. But yeah, it's so good that you could join us today. We really enjoyed it. It's been so nice to have Fuchsia with us again. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. I've loved it. And yeah, if you are local, if you do feel like you can still go out, or actually, I should say, sorry, now I'm just doing my plug. It's on until February. The display is on until February. So, and actually, you know, I don't just want to plug my display. I want to say the rest of the museum is wonderful as well, and I've learnt so much from the rest of the team here who have been brilliant in helping me put this together. So yeah, do pop down if you can, and if not, we'll put as much online for you as we can.
Yeah. Have a nice afternoon, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.